Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Under Construction. I am your host, Ellis, otherwise known as Train Man, and this is episode number 67, I believe. We are here, of course, on Tolbrand, the route on which we work, and we have plenty of work to do. Starting off with the areas that we started to fill in last time and that we mostly cleaned up the trees from, and that's about it, and otherwise we just have to do some texturing on to make good. This being one of them, this is actually an area that is going to be textured differently, but this and this, all this area over here, and then this area needs to be filled in with trees, but all this area here is area that needs dirt and ballast and things like that. So let's not waste time. Let's get to it. Anyway, I do have one question, which I will save for a little bit later because there's something present on my mind that I want to talk about. And it is the midterms. Now, for those of you not in the US, I'm sure you've been swamped with news anyway, because as I understand, it doesn't matter where you are, you can't escape US news. But for those out of the loop, the US just had its midterm election, so not a presidential election, but the election in between. Now, what was at stake? The Republicans, who had before the election, they were, I should say, the controlling party in the House of Representatives, which is the more representative portion of government. It's divided up by population. States with more population get more representation. Although I learned something about that, which is slightly annoying, which I might get to later. And the Senate, where every state gets 2 representatives, so every state gets equal representation. And, of course, the presidency, which wasn't up for grabs. Now, looking at the numbers before the election, so I will preface this by saying this is going to be much less of a politics-focused thought process and more of a statistics-focused one, because while I may have bombed my statistics class in college, I still find it very interesting seeing how the predictions matched up with the will of the voters in the end. Because there are a lot of things, and there are a lot of things that factor in, and to add to that, there are still some races that are undecided. In Florida, in Arizona, I believe, and one other one elsewhere. Well, there are a few House of Representatives races, because the way it goes is all of the representatives in the House of Representatives were up for re-election this time around. Nothing changed in my state, really. Nothing interesting to report from Rhode Island. We have the same people. I didn't really have any issue with them, just to go to the political side for a moment. And yeah, that's really all I have to say. I didn't really have any issue with them. I didn't really have any issue with anybody that was running the race. And it wasn't a close race by any means. It was the kind of thing where the incumbent, people were pretty much happy with how the incumbent was doing, so there wasn't a lot of motion to change what they were doing, and in all cases. Anyway, I digress. The Republicans controlled every branch of government, and that's not that unusual, but it is something that normally doesn't last for long. So, looking at the numbers, you'd expect things to flip to the other major party in the U.S., that'd be the Democrats. So, the seats that were up for re-election in the Senate, because not all of those seats get put up at once, even though there are fewer of them, which seems kind of backwards, but the Senate is designed to be the more stable of the houses. It's supposed to be the one where, things don't change too often, whereas the House of Representatives, being based on population, is more volatile. So, the seats up in the Senate that were up for re-election were largely Republican seats, which means that, because incumbents have an advantage, It means that for the Democrats to win the Senate, they would have had to flip seats. They would have had to change seats from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party. And that is a tough thing to do. It's tough to flip a seat. Usually, that only happens when people are very upset with their current leadership, willing enough to accept somebody who they haven't had before, who they don't know what to expect, because that's really, what is the main fear in everyone's hearts? It's the fear of the unknown. And when you're electing somebody new, you don't necessarily know how they're going to act. You don't know if they're going to follow what they say they're going to do, and you don't know even necessarily what they will do outside of what they've said they will do. That sort of thing. It's a lot of questions, and for somebody coming onto the stage, for example, like Beto O'Rourke, particularly him being somebody that was very unknown, he was a nominee for the state of Texas, a senator from Texas, and he was relatively unknown before the campaign, despite being a state representative, I believe. I loosely followed the campaign, and have only recently been researching him because there are rumors that he might float a presidential bid, and it's important to get on the, sort of on the ball early with candidates and stuff like that. What have they done in the past? Who do they vote with? How do they vote? How strictly do they walk or toe the party line, or how much do they reach across the aisle on things? That sort of thing. I may talk about him later, based on what I've seen. But, that's the basic rundown. The Democrats had an uphill battle. The Democrats had an uphill battle. Wow, I can't words all of a sudden, and I'm encouraging it. Had an uphill battle to win the Senate. However, many seats which were formerly Republicans in the House were predicted to flip to the Democrats. And there were a few seats that were hotly contested, particularly one in Kentucky, which was a very early one because not everyone's polls closed at the same time. And that was one that I was keeping an eye on. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up, again, isn't because of a love for politics necessarily, it's a love for statistics. And I got way too much enjoyment out of sitting at work, with my 3 monitors way later than I should have been in my office, watching numbers on a screen, effectively, and live blogs and stuff like that, and going, ooh, who's going to win this seat? Who's going to win this seat? And the Republican incumbent very narrowly beat out the Democratic nominee for the seat. Again, that was a House of Representatives seat in the 6th District of Kentucky. So, yeah, the seat was maintained there, and that could have been an indicator of things tipping, much farther towards the Democrats than the median prediction. And, as it turned out, if you looked at 538's prediction, just to spoil everything here, if you looked at 538's prediction from early on, they seemed to do a pretty good job of figuring out who was going to come out the winners and the losers in these races. It was all probability. You can never totally guess what people are going to do, but they do a pretty good job of it. They make their living doing it, basically. And, people got upset with them after they allegedly failed to predict Trump winning in 2016. But if you look at the numbers, they did give Donald Trump a 30% chance of winning, which is well within a margin, of things that can happen. If you've ever played XCOM, you know that 90% is not a sure thing. The whim of the voters can go every way. Lots of different things can sway that. In fact, in full knowledge of this, organizations like the FBI try to avoid releasing things in months, or not in necessarily the months, but in the weeks leading up to major elections, so that it won't, swing voters hard in one way or another. Now, whether you think that's a good policy is up to you. I can see how you could view it as withholding information, as well as I could see how you could view it as trying not to interfere, especially if a claim is not totally verified yet. But, you know, it's a multifaceted issue. I'm just sort of stating what the Department of, or not the Department of Justice, but the FBI does. So, anyway, the runner there, which I didn't learn about this until after the fact. Apparently, she was kind of a big deal. The Democratic nominee. She had a really cool advertisement, which mostly revolved around her wanting to be a fighter pilot, and I thought that was really cool, because something that we're seeing a little bit more this election cycle is, in some cases, not all, but in some, and it's a nice, refreshing thing to see, is some fewer attacks. You know, it would be nice for politics to move away from the attacking stance, even though that's very difficult to do, because you still have to energize your voter base, you still have to get people riled up, and the easiest way to do that is to say, don't vote for that guy, because of what they've done. And, you know, you can see this in pretty much any election, especially modern elections, because we have access to this kind of data. But, or, you know, this kind of telecommunication, this kind of information. It's not necessarily the data, that's not what it's about. It's about what, you know, what can you say about your opponent that will get people to question their vote. That will get people to think, oh, maybe I shouldn't vote for that guy. And that's all well and good, you know, it's a valid tactic and all. You can certainly play to voters' hearts just as well as you can play to their minds by telling them that, you know, this person has done these things, or they have allied themselves with this person who is, you know, who has done some such things, or they've allied themselves with this group, which we don't agree with, and their motives, and their tactics, and, you know, whatever. And that goes for pretty much everyone, because nobody's record is spotless, and everyone has things that they like and they don't like. So, you will always be able to appeal to a group by doing that, unless you start saying stuff like, you know, this nominee breathes air, and so that's a terrible thing, and we need to not do that, or, you know, some such thing. Unless you find really universal things and start arguing against them, then I feel like it will be difficult, then I feel like it's not particularly difficult to sway a base based on those kind of advertisements. It's much harder to sway a base based on the kind of things that really make you think, which is unfortunate. And it's not because people are stupid, it's just because people are lazy. And I don't mean lazy necessarily in the derogatory sense where you sit on your couch all day, but it's because we as human beings tend to take shortcuts, where we hear something and we go, ah, right, and we sort of accept that thing. It's much easier to fool someone than it is to convince someone that they have been fooled, and so usually it's whoever lands the first punch in those kind of things that, you know, that gets the outcome, or in some cases, whoever lands the last punch. Not because of a knockout, but because of time running out. Whoever's running the most ads in the very, you know, in the lead up to the election night. That sort of thing. And to be fair, like I said, with my state didn't have a lot of interesting things going on. We didn't even have many interesting propositions on the ballot. I didn't really hear very much. There was very little on television that was, you know, trying to create energy to vote. Although the things that I did see were certainly things that were drawn more out of fear. You know, candidates' relations to parties or party members, or anyone but, you know, some person, or, you know, whatever. I mean, and some of those are second-hand accounts. Again, I didn't see all of these. You know, I feel like I'm quite connected, but all things considered, maybe I'm not that connected. Maybe I'm particularly unconnected because, you know, whatever reason. I don't know. I'm not that good. I'm not as in tune to my local stuff as I am to around the world stuff. Maybe that's why I was so interested in the midterms, because they're around, or, well, across the country stuff at least. But anyway. So, and I'm being very vague here, I'm trying not to mention names, because the elections are over, what does it matter? You know, I already said we kept all of the same people, nothing really changed, it wasn't a big deal, There weren't any riots. There weren't any protests. So, why spend more time on my local politics when, in my opinion, right now there isn't very much to spend time on. As long as we keep doing the infrastructure projects that we need, as long as we keep, doing the things that we're doing. Of course, I care about infrastructure a lot because it pays my bills. Of course, as a voter, I'm very self-serving. You just need to tell me, you just need to tell me that you're going to be funding infrastructure, and you already have my vote, basically. I feel like a lot of civil engineers are like that. I feel like they should be, or else they're voting against their own self-interests. But anyway, I digress. Let's get back to the main stuff that was going on. So, because of the uphill battle, the Democrats did not take the House. The Republicans maintained the House and most of their seats. It is still up in the air as to what the net change will be, but there was at least one flip of a Democratic senator to a Republican senator in Illinois, I believe it was, which was a surprise, but not totally a surprise, because this Illinois senator, I'm going to go with Illinois, I'm pretty sure it's Illinois, final answer, did vote against Brett Kavanaugh, and so that energizes the Republican base, and and thus led to him being voted out of office. It's what happens when you do something that's against the will of your constituents. It's the point of voting. Sorry, I'm getting hoarse already. We're only 16 minutes in. I do love talking politics. I'm sure you guys have gathered this by now, but I do love talking it. I don't like necessarily arguing, although I feel like there is plenty of good argument to be had. I just, I always want to be careful with that because I know it can get to, sort of a mudslinggy place, sort of like the advertisements themselves. And I don't want, because we all know YouTube is great for comments, and especially political ones. I don't want to incite anything, and furthermore, I don't want anybody to not like me, or, unsubscribe simply because of something political. This is not a political channel. This is a channel where I make videos in trains, and a couple of other games sometimes. So, if you are not American and you are annoyed by the fact that I'm talking about the midterms, you can always say something. I am more than happy to respond to comments, and you can really shape the discussion that way, because I will do my best to respond to any and every kind of comment, even if I don't agree with it, as long as it's on this video, and as long as it doesn't have anything to do with Nosum River. So, with that in mind, yeah, there are still a couple of senator races, or whatever, races that are running still, that votes are still being counted. Again, I believe it's Florida and Arizona. And that, that's sort of a big deal. We're a few days after the election here, and we're still looking at some toss-ups. There were a few upsets on either side, people that were predicted to be Democrats and a Republican took it, or people that were predicted to be Republicans and a Democrat took it. And that, I'm forgetting what I need. I need the other rock bit. Yeah. So, some seats got flipped, some to the Republican Party, and some to the Democrat Party. The Democratic Party, or Democrat Party. I'm not sure what, the full name of it is. I just hear, Dems and Repubs, Republicans and Democrats, that sort of thing. It's funny that the Republican Party name does not change when you're using the different, I wouldn't say tenses, but, the different usages of the word. So it's always the Republican Party, they are Republican, and they are Republicans, whereas the Democratic Party are Democrats, and I don't know. it's interesting the way words work, but this is not about words. If you want to talk about words, ask about some words, and I'll talk about words. Anyway, I need to start laying down this texture. This is going to be our go-to texture for a lot of things. But the seats that got flipped, the seats that got changed, were not enough to change the orientation of the Senate. So, on the other hand, the House of Representatives. Looking at the predictions beforehand, the Republicans were expected to lose like a couple dozen seats to Democratic candidates. And I believe the high prediction was like 40 and the low prediction was like 16 or 20. In order to flip the House, in order to change the majority, the Democrats needed a 21-seat gain in total. Something like that. It was pretty significant because the wins for the Republican Party in 2016 were similarly very significant. And because of this, you'd think that it was, kind of a long shot to get even one chamber flipped, but based on polling results, it seemed that a lot of people were unhappy with their Republican representatives, at least more so than their Republican senators, although, like I said, most of the seats up for re-election for Republicans this time around were relatively safe Republican seats. They weren't ones that they had to worry very much about keeping. They were ones that, they could pretty much count on keeping. And isn't that nice to run a race and not worry about losing? I'm sure plenty of candidates on both sides of the aisle were jealous of these other candidates that had it easy. But at any rate, I want that. At any rate, the Democrats took on the order of the current prediction, and there are still maybe a dozen races up in the air, maybe less than that as of me making this video, and quite a few of them are neck and neck. If not neck and neck, then they are like 60-30, or 70-30 or 60-40, I should say. And as already discussed, it has been shown that 30% is not a low enough percentage to lose, because that isn't percentage of the votes, as you might think. It's percentage of chance of winning. So, and you'll see, people with relatively close chances of winning might have, or will definitely have very close vote counts to one another, or projected vote counts to one another, whereas those those expected to win by a veritable landslide or a relative landslide will still not win by that many votes or that many percent overall, but they still are outside of sort of the margin of error of polling of, it's definitely going to go this way or it's definitely going to go that way. I believe the Pennsylvania senator is one that I glanced at, that the race, on the face of it, looked fairly close, as in it looked like the numbers of votes and the percentage of votes to each person were actually fairly close, but when you looked at it from the point of view of chance to win based on those percentages, there was no way that the nominee was going to beat out the incumbent. The numbers just weren't there. They weren't close enough. And they weren't within a polling margin of error, as determined by 538 at least, to make anybody nervous or question, or to make the outcome of that race questionable. So, yeah, sometimes things are pretty close, and they look pretty close, and sometimes things are not very close, even though they look pretty close. It's the kind of thing that's just something that happens in politics. It's something that happens in statistics and voting, too. And that's why this stuff's very interesting, because you take statistics, which are already very random, and you add a human element, and suddenly you have no idea what can happen. Suddenly you're playing the guessing game, and nobody really knew if the Republicans were going to keep the House. Nobody really knew if the Democrats were going to, if the Democrats were going to take the Senate. I could have said that either way. And in both of those cases, if somebody had made those predictions, which I'm sure people did, I believe in, in the U.S. you can't bet on elections, but in the U.K. you totally can, and there were definitely people that were betting on the elections. And I find that also really entertaining, because if you're not privy to the actual politics of it, if you're not in the U.S. and you aren't directly affected by who wins the gubernatorial race for the state of Arkansas, for example, I don't even know if that one was close. I just came up with one. Was that close? I remember that being called kind of late. Maybe I should look that one up. But, state of Arkansas, governor race, if you aren't going to be directly affected by that, which really nobody outside of Arkansas is going to be affected by a governor of Arkansas. That's kind of the point. They run the state and not much else. Then who says you can't make a quick buck off of it? Is what I'm getting at. The U.S. does, actually, but other countries don't care. So, yeah. Put some money down. Put some money down on the next long shot candidate. And, maybe you'll win something. Especially if you like the other guy. Here's what you do. And you can do this for sports, too, which this is actually legal in the U.S. If you bet on the team that you don't like, then either way, you win. If you can stomach the loss of whatever money, obviously don't put your month's rent on, on the Philadelphia Eagles if if they aren't about to win. But, obviously don't gamble your month's rent, period. That should be an obviously, but maybe it's not. I really hope it is, but maybe it's not. You can never be too sure these days. Or any days, I don't know. Were people smarter back then? Probably not. We just heard about the smart ones more. Anyway, yeah, as a wise man might say, if you put your money on the thing that you don't want, either way you win something. And that is a really funny concept to me. I'm not a betting man, I'm not a gambling man, even though I love these statistics things. But I could totally see myself, I'll put a few bucks down on the team I don't want to win, because, why not? What if they win? Then I get something out of it instead of just misery. Honestly, I would bet against the Cleveland Browns I'd do that anyway. I do want the Cleveland Browns to win their games. I feel bad for them, and their fan base as a whole, and their city, because it's Cleveland. Sorry, people from Cleveland. It's just... it's Cleveland. Just kidding, I actually quite like Cleveland. Having been there a couple of times, I really did enjoy going to Cleveland, and I can recommend that and Pittsburgh. They don't exactly seem like vacationers' delight cities, but they have a lot of things going for them. Pittsburgh, if you want to see a lot of cool bridges, cool infrastructure, that sort of thing, absolutely wonderful city. And Cleveland has the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and some of the cheapest NFL tickets in the nation. Not actually sure if that's true, but I could believe it. But the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is great. They've got some good food. At least I can attest to that from when I was there. Pittsburgh has some great historic districts and stuff like that. I visited a couple while I was there. They also have the Pittsburgh Vintage Grand Prix, which is the last sanctioned road race in the country, automobile road race in the country, and it is vintage, as the name might imply. So you get to see a lot of cool old cars running that kind of race, which I went there for. I went there to see that as part of the Fiat Freakout, which is an annual event for Fiat owners. I do not own a Fiat, but my mom does, and that is a great group of people, and those are some cool-looking cars. Not just the new Fiats, or not, specifically the new Fiats. some of the old Fiats and the Alfas and the Dinos and even other Italian cars, Ferraris, they show up. It's an event. I don't think you need to have. Well, that was part of an auto show, so I assume you could get in without owning a Fiat. But if you do own a Fiat, find out when one of those is coming to an area near you. I'm not sure how far west they necessarily go, because the farthest west one that I know of happened in Chicago a few years ago, and I've got the poster for it. I wasn't able to attend, but they had a bunch of old posters at the one in Pittsburgh, so I grabbed as many as I could. And by old, I mean, from previous years. So, yeah, I got totally off track. Betting to sports to Fiats. I think I'm gonna stop putting all this detail into this area right here. I'll just run the dirt for the road because we're spending an awful lot of time on just this section of road and rail. Come on, game. Come on, game. Alright. So, yeah, in the end, so to cut to the chase, in the end what happened was the Republicans held the Senate, and the Democrats took the House. And so now we have one major party, or, one branch of the legislature for each major party, which usually means that nothing is going to go anywhere fast. But the consequence of that is that it means that there will have to be more across the aisle legislation for anything major to get done, which means that there's going to be compromise. And that's a good thing. It doesn't matter whose side you're on necessarily, because we're all, Americans. For Americans, we're all Americans here. We're all Americans here, and we don't all agree on the same things. And, representation of everybody is an important thing. It's what our country was based around. Representation. Being able to do the things that you want to do and have the things that you want to have. And by you, I mean the royal you. And, being able to uphold not just the Constitution of this country, but, all of the things that, Americans hold important, whether that be, whether that be cultural or economic or scientific or, that sort of thing. And there are many, many, many disagreements on what it takes to do that, and what the important things are, and how we should deal with them. And that's why, that's why when you have a party in power across the board, then things might get a little bit out of balance. And if you have both parties in power, then things might not. You have a better shot at keeping things a little bit more copacetic, because people are required to work together. Now, speaking of working together, this is where I'm going to bring up Beto O'Rourke. And he was, like I said, a candidate, the Democratic nominee for Texas senator, not beating, but he lost to, by a rather close margin for Texas, the incumbent Ted Cruz, who was one of the Republican Party nominees for president. So, not nominees. He was one of the Republican Party, runners-up? I don't know. He was running. He was running within his party. I'm not sure what the word for that is. It might still be nominee, although they didn't nominate him. Candidates. He was a candidate. That's the word. So, he ran a really grassroots campaign, which I know is sort of a buzzword these days, but I don't really know how else to describe it. He visited every county in Texas and live streamed the whole thing. There are a bunch of Adobe videos of him doing dopey things. I have no idea. I even looked it up and I don't remember because I just straight up could not tell how old he was. He acted like he was 25, but you got to be 35 to run for president, so he's older than that. It's not like he's some kid fresh out of college that's trying to run for president. And I watched a couple of press conferences. I watched the debates. Now going back, I found some videos that had been posted online between Ted Cruz and O'Rourke, and and it was very interesting to see the guy in action. He's not a very good debater, I'll say that much. And he definitely isn't a very good debater when stacked up against Ted Cruz, because Ted Cruz not only knows his base very well because he's been doing this for a while, he knows a lot of the talking points that need to be said. He's played the game. He's a politician. He is, what's the word? I mean, he's good at his job. There's no other way to say it. When you're a good politician, you're good at doing the things that politicians do. Creating. I won't call it wordplay necessarily, because that makes it sound too artsy. But putting words together in a way that is, both truthful and and strong enough to energize people. Making light of things, making people energized towards your cause, towards what you want, and letting people know that you're there for them. It's this balancing act between. It's a balancing act between saying everything that you need to say and everything that you want to say, and you can't choose everything. So he's been in the game for a while, and he knows how to get that kind of stuff done. He knows how to be a politician. He at the very least knows how to campaign. So, he won his campaign, and I don't think it was undeserved. I do like the sort of rhetoric that Beto O'Rourke is saying, though. And the thing about it is, he did very little, and people were chastising him for not going on the attack as much. And this is where I come back to what I was talking about before, where I don't think, and this is now I'm in the op-ed part, I don't think that's a big deal, or at least I don't think it should be. Now, whether it is or it's not, that's maybe a discussion for another time, but I don't think it should be. I don't think we should be needing attack ads to get our point across. I think we should be talking more policy, because right now there's not a lot of substance. It's a lot of hot air. And, just in general, it's tough to discern, not just fact from fiction, but it's tough to discern what people really mean by, when they say what they say, and if something really is an issue or not when somebody tries to make light of it. And that's kind of a big deal. That's kind of an issue. Because if you think about it, it should be pretty readily apparent whether, support of something is good for you or it's not. And if you are very firmly on one side. So, okay, let me say something. I know that this looked beautiful the way it was, but it's not the way it should be, because this wouldn't be hewn from stone. This would be a dirt embankment. So I'm sorry that I have to change this, but I do have to change this. It's like putting it in sloppy low def, and I apologize. So that means I'm going to have to have grass on this to make it look a little bit better. And because he was trying to unite the people of Texas, which is a very diverse state, not just from the people itself, but for the political ideologies. The major cities have become meccas. Austin especially. Austin is trying to fight with Portland for title of the weirdest city in the nation. Portland, Oregon, I mean. And it has these major media companies like Rooster Teeth there, and a lot of, major events. And that is a very stark contrast to what the state really is, or at least it was in, for the vast majority of not only his history, but just over the vast majority of its landscape. It's a state of farmers. It's a state of cowboys. It is, it is, and tries to remain the embodiment of the Wild West. No other state really captures that, and it has to do with this, this Texas spirit, this everything's bigger in Texas, sort of thing. No other state really reflects upon themselves that much, and I think that's a testament to the sort of, mental fortitude is not the right word, but it's sort of what I'm getting at. It's this immense, powerful pride that Texans have for their state. And it's a big deal. You can't deny that. And you can't shut it down. And if you're ever going to energize a base in Texas, you have to, and it sounds like, no duh, but you have to cater to Texans. You have to cater to all Texans. You have to cater to everybody. And because there isn't one demographic to go after that's going to get you that winning vote. And I think that's, I think that's a big deal. I think that a lot of potential candidates in Texas may have underestimated that, and Beto O'Rourke didn't. I have to say his whole name because I don't know why I feel the compulsion to say his whole name. I guess I would say it for the president. I guess I would say Donald Trump. I don't think I'd say Barack Obama because it's a little bit more wordy. Donald Trump is much shorter in terms of syllables. Ted Cruz is much shorter in terms of syllables. And yet I'm saying Ted Cruz and Beto O'Rourke. Maybe it's because I really like saying his first name. I don't know. Maybe because it rolls off the tongue better. That isn't actually his first name. His first name is Robert. But because of where he grew up, which was, I think, El Paso. Close to the Mexican border. If your name ends in Erto, like Roberto, you become Eto. So, Beto. Or, that sort of thing. He explained that in one of his things. Again, I got kind of caught up in the hype around him, but it was after the fact. I didn't really hear about him until the race was pretty much over. I'd heard that there was somebody in Texas that was giving Ted Cruz a run for his money, and I was a little bit surprised. Because it's Texas. But I feel like many of the things, based on what I was hearing, it was not a question of, is this guy better than Ted Cruz? Or, well, no, is this guy a good Democrat? I don't know what I'm trying to get at necessarily, but it was the question of, is he good enough to replace Ted Cruz and still do the things that we liked about Ted Cruz, is basically what I was getting out of that. Because no matter how you swing it, Ted Cruz is, I hesitate to call him a polarizing figure because I'm not sure who likes or who loves Ted Cruz. Maybe his wife, probably. I would wager she does. And his kids. There are people that love Ted Cruz. I'm not trying to say he's unloved, but what I mean is, I'm not sure there are too many voters that are really, really proud of Ted Cruz. Maybe there are. Maybe there are. There have to be some, right? But it really felt to me, based on what I was hearing, that it was more about, is Beto good enough to replace Ted Cruz? Will he make us as happy as Ted Cruz does? Now, that might not come from policy things necessarily. It might come from the idea that, well, Ted Cruz as a human being makes us unhappy, but we like his policies. So maybe if Beto makes us, happy as a human being, even if we don't totally agree with his policies, then it'll be good enough. And I can, I see where that's coming from. I can understand that. I can agree that might be a good idea. Now, there's another part of me that says, no, absolutely not. You have to vote on somebody because of their policies, because that's what you're electing them for. And yes, it's important to sort of weed out candidates that are not, emotionally fit, or, that will put a bad name on whatever the office is. But that's what primaries are for. You have people that are, more or less of the same same opinions on things because they're running for the same party. Now, party, in the U.S., because we only have two, the parties are actually very diverse. It's very, very difficult to generalize across a whole party, which is why I say that, there have to be some people that really like Ted Cruz for what he does and who he is. Because there are probably some that just like how he acts, and there's got to be a subset of people that like how he acts and how he governs. So, it's out there. I'm sure it's not like finding a unicorn, finding a real Ted Cruz supporter. But there was definitely a lot of unrest in the state of Texas surrounding Ted Cruz. At any rate, yeah, that was the main highlight. That's what I got interested in, because if Beto goes for a presidential run, which he might have a shot at doing, based on the way he talks, based on the way he acts, based on the way he's historically worked across party lines, which makes me very happy. He is an excellent candidate. And I will have to look harder into him and his record and things like that, and really look hard at what I agree with and what I don't for this guy. Because obviously I'm not ever going to agree with any politician on 100% of things. Hell, even if I was the politician, I don't think I'd agree with myself on 100% of things. There are too many things that are questionable. There are too many things that leave a lot either to the imagination or to, up for debate. There are a lot of things that are a big deal. A lot of hot-button issues, some of which have become more or less hot over time, depending on who's up for election, depending on, what's happened lately. We recently had a shooting in the LA area, I believe, or San Diego area, Southern California. I didn't hear that much about it, which is surprising because normally those things are all over the news immediately. And of course my heart goes out to the victims and the families of the victims and moreover, just everyone that was there that had to witness that, because that stuff sticks with you. That stuff does not go away. And it's, and that's a big deal. And so we will probably see a gun legislation debate come up again, because that's what happens. When a major event happens, people tend to gravitate around it. Now, people have gotten upset sometimes about using an event like that, using a tragedy as a way to further an agenda. But, actually, I won't do the but first, because the but comes a little later. I can understand why people would do that. It's a way to capitalize on not just the shock value of what happened, but also public involvement and public interest in a particular topic. When there's a major derailment, people tend to bring up railroad safety. When there's a major, plane crash, people tend to bring up airline safety. When there's a major shooting, people tend to bring up gun safety. It's not ridiculous to do, because it's in the conversation again. It's not something that's been shoved to the back of somebody's mind, and especially if there's a repeated series of events, like, for example, there have been a number of Amtrak crashes lately. When there's a repeated series of events, there tends to be a public sort of, a public feeling about what's going on, about what is the, people thinking about, okay, what's the best course of action here? Is there something I should change? Is there something that I can, are there people that I can vote for that will, affect some sort of change to this thing that I'm now interested in and passionate about? On the other hand, it is, especially something like this, it is a tragedy. It is a big deal. There's definitely, times to debate and times to mourn, and sometimes those times get too blurred. When something like this happens, you don't necessarily need people running out immediately saying, well, the way to fix it is this, this, and this, and this, and this. The conversation is an important one to have. Don't get me wrong. When something happens like this, especially because this is not a freak event, even though we do live in the safest time in human history, we are connected to a 24-hour news cycle, so it does feel like these things happen all the time. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean they do, but when you hear about these sort of things frequently, and you realize that they do happen this frequently, then you start to worry about it more than you would otherwise. Because if something like this doesn't happen in your hometown, even 30 years ago, if something like this doesn't happen in your hometown, you might hear about it on the news. If it's a really big deal. Everyone heard about Columbine, because Columbine was a really big deal. But Columbine was a landmark. Columbine was something special, or at least we thought it was back then. And I say we, I wasn't really around for Columbine. But it was a big deal. It was important. It was major. It was landmark. It was all those things. And people said, well, this is horrible. What can we do to prevent this from happening again? And things changed a little bit, and then it happened again, and it happens again, and again, and again, and again. And, again, it doesn't necessarily come from, and I haven't looked up the statistics on this, I'm just using what I know, which is why I try to be relatively impartial when I'm pulling things out of my behind. I try to leave room for the, well, maybe I'm wrong. Because maybe I'm wrong. And I feel like everyone should do that, even or perhaps especially in a political debate where knowing what's going on is very important. If you don't know what's going on, you don't know what's going on. You don't have the authority to speak on something that you don't know about. And, that's something that maybe we've lost. It's the ability to say, I don't know. Because we're so interconnected, we're so, neck deep in information that not knowing something is some sort of cardinal sin. And when you're a politician, you're supposed to know your way around all of the issues that your constituents might be facing. Not knowing is kind of a big deal. Because people will think, well, how does this candidate not know about this issue? How does this candidate not understand what I'm facing? Then, they clearly can't be right for me because because they don't know. And people will assume it means, oh, you've never looked into it or you don't care. But if you're unaware, you're unaware. And normally I don't like ignorance, please. But the fact of the matter is you can't know everything at once. And so what an event like this allows us to do is it allows us to bring evidence to the forefront. It allows us to look at motives and look at, causes and look at, people and places and, why did it happen here? Why did this person do this? Was there any kind of premeditation? Were there any signs of that premeditation? If we look at recently the pipe bombs in the mail, which I'd like to laugh at the guy for making a lot of real terrible pipe bombs, and also if you've seen his van, holy cow. When you have that many stickers on your van, there's a problem. The FBI should be watching you. But he had a whole lot of stickers on his van. And he clearly, based on the stickers themselves, based on the content of the stickers, he clearly had an agenda, if you can deduce that from all the people that he sent bombs to. And furthermore, if I recall correctly, he was very vocal about his political thoughts on social media. And that's, okay. That brings us to the question of should the FBI be stalking us on social media? And that's a hard question to answer. There are people that will say, no, absolutely not. It's my private life. The FBI has no reason to interfere or look into my private life. There's another side that will say, you are posting it on the internet. You know the risks of putting things online. It's an interconnected database of computers where people can look at different things. You're posting something for many people to see. And that comes at perhaps the cost of your privacy. Now, there are some people that don't do that and still get watched, still get looked at via, browsing habits, search habits, that sort of thing. That goes a lot deeper and is a little bit more concerning than people looking at your Facebook wall. And by people, I mean an FBI agent, or CIA agent, or somebody, anybody, everybody. Scream, because we're being watched, and there's not much we can do about it. Unless you really go off the grid, unless you go hide in the woods, there's not really anything you can do to change that, aside from voting, of course. But even still, I would doubt that even the most staunch of politicians, if they manage to get elected, would be able to do much in taking down, sort of the web of information gathering people and groups that we have established, because they aren't just for us. They're for our allies, they're for data companies, they're for search companies, even like Google and Bing and whatever other searches there are, because I don't know of any, I'm going to be honest. It's the kind of thing, advertisers as well. Advertisers. People complain about advertisers all the time. Holy cow. Advertisers have been around forever. And yeah, they might be a little bit more annoying than you remember them being, because normally you don't get the option to skip some of them. But that's how advertising is now, and if you're upset on people for advertising, that's how people make money. That's how people continue to make their content. Advertising has made the world go around, has made television go around for decades upon decades. And radio. Television and radio. It's not going away. And the way to not spend crazy amounts of money on advertising, and also to not have a stupid amount of advertisements, which those two things are largely coupled because companies pay for the advertisements that they run, is to tailor your advertisements to the individual. Now, CGP Grey has great videos on this, and I'm channeling a little bit of CGP Grey right now because I've been kind of addicted to his videos after the most recent one came out, which is about Ellis Island and Liberty Island. And that is such a great topic, because it's another Bizarre Borders video, and I love those. I eat them up. So check out CGP Grey if you don't know him. If you don't know him, what are you doing? Go pause this video, watch a bunch of his, come back to it. We'll talk more about midterms later. So, yeah. I totally forgot where I was. Beto O'Rourke was once stranded in Texas with another Texas senator, I think it was. It was a senator, not another member of the House like him, but a senator. And he needed to get back to D.C. for a vote, so he rented a car with the other senator and drove 1,600 miles with them to Washington, D.C. And after that, they started working on a lot of legislation together, which shows that maybe if you're trapped in a car with somebody for a couple of days, you start to make good with them. You start to become a little bit more friendly, or maybe it's Stockholm syndrome. I don't know, but you start to find some common ground, which is an important thing to do in politics and in life. So, yeah, I think he's got a shot if he decides to run. He previously said that he wasn't planning a run, but that was before he lost. He might change his mind now. And people are saying, though, that he would make a good vice president. I think so as well, but the fact of the matter is, what does the vice president even do anymore? It might be because last time we had a fairly prominent vice president, and this time we have an extremely prominent president, so you don't get to hear about what the vice president's doing very much. You don't get to hear about what Mike Pence is up to, because you're hearing about what Donald Trump is up to. You did get to hear about what Bro Biden was up to, because not only was he making a name for himself, just generally being awesome, there was less crazy news revolving around Barack Obama's presidency. And that let the vice get a little bit more in the spotlight. So, maybe Beto would make a really good vice president. I don't know. I wouldn't be about to vote on a ticket based on a vice president alone, but he could make a case for me in that case. Now, that said, rarely, I don't ever think the running mates are decided before the primary. So, that would be interesting to do, I think. That'd be interesting to have, to know who's going to be the vice even before I cast my primary vote for either party, because it might sway my opinion in one direction or the other. Now, a vice president and a president are supposed to work fairly closely to one another, and the vice president largely it serves as a backup in case something happens to the president, God forbid. But I wanted to be on move. But the fact of the matter is, they're also a mediator in the House and that sort of thing, or in the Senate, I believe they're whatever. Oh, I was talking about the House. So the House was supposed to be proportional to the number of seats, to the number of people in each state, and it's not anymore. It's a little bit closer to electoral votes, where it's kind of in the middle. It's not totally proportional to population, but at the same time, it does expand or retract your number of representatives based on population. Now, a while back, I can't remember when exactly this was, the House of Representatives got capped at the current size, which is, I think, 437 people? What? Oh, there's a Steam update. I'll update that later. 437-ish people, something like that, 435 people. Which presents a problem. As big states continue to grow, they stop being proportionally represented, or as small states begin to shrink, or as small states shrink in comparison to large states, or large states grow in comparison to small states, it stops being proportional, and the vote stops being proportional. You start, and that's, arguably all well and good for electoral votes, where you're voting for the president. You're voting for one guy, and the electoral system is supposed to bridge the gap between having a purely representative, purely republic-style voting system and a purely democratic-style voting system. Republican voting systems being ones based on representatives, democratic-style voting systems being ones based on direct numbers of votes. And no, this has nothing to do with the Democratic and Republican parties. I'm not even sure if there's, any real reason why the names are what they are, but they are what they are. So, don't get confused, they have nothing to do with that. This is not like the Democratic Party supports the Democratic voting system and the Republican Party supports the Republican... No. It doesn't make any sense, first of all, because the U.S. is a democratic republic. We have both. 2, you wouldn't be changing that, really, anytime soon, realistically, anyway. You have people that might want to, but as far as I've seen, there really, there have been moves to abolish the Electoral College, which I could understand, and which I could see getting a little bit more traction. Then we're going to make it a straight democracy or a straight republic, because we still have a legislative branch that works as both, as previously noted, or works at least as a republic. Because you're electing legislators. And that's what a republic does. But I already forgot where I was at. But the problem with this House issue is, now that we have a capped number of seats in the House, you can't accurately get that disparity of size for a decent representation in the House. And, it's not about, there isn't really an argument there for, well, that gives bias to larger states in the House. Well, yes, it does. That's the point of the House. The Senate is supposed to be for proportional, or no, sorry, of non-proportional representation. It's supposed to be for the everyone gets 2 votes, the equal representation. This is the proportional representation. And the proportional representation right now is kind of broken. Now, I don't see that being fixed anytime soon, because, as sort of previously indicated, there is definitely argument as to whether or not fixed is fixed, and as to what that fix really would be. Do you lower the threshold for a single representative to the population of the lowest state, that would be Wyoming, and then tack on another representative for every population of Wyoming that a state has? Does that make sense? Does that work? We don't really know. That would probably take some analysis. And it's the analysis I don't think anybody really feels like doing, because it's easier to ignore it and say close enough. Now, the restriction was put in place in the House so that you don't have a ridiculous amount of House members. So you don't have a ridiculous amount of representatives. Now, yeah, that's why you'd have to base it on the lowest population state, which, as of right now, I'm not sure is that different than what the threshold for a single, although you can't have less than one, a single representative is. I don't know off the top of my head. I thought it was 500K, but I'm not sure. Or maybe it's, yeah, I thought it was 500K. Because Rhode Island has 2, and we have scarcely over 1 million people crammed into our tiny state. Which is still double that of Wyoming, which is kind of bizarre and amazing, and really, I'm glad I don't live in Wyoming. Sorry, Wyoming, I've never been to you. I don't have the follow-up that says about all the good things. I mean, you've got the UP STEAM program, which is good in that it's a STEAM program, and bad because of the first 2 letters. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of argument to be had there, and I don't expect that to be changed anytime soon. Whether change would be fixed or not is another debate, which people would have to have before anybody decides on what to do. So, that's the problem asterisk with the House of Representatives. Personally, I go for, I think that it would be a good idea to, remove the restriction and let that be the proportional House that it was set up to be. But maybe that wouldn't be as good of an idea for whatever reason. Mostly because, I had no problem with the way the House of Representatives works until I heard that it was supposed to be a different way. And then it sort of all clicked. And I went, well, that's why we have our 2 branches of legislature, one to do this and one to do that. And then somewhere along the road, we decided not to do that. And I'm not sure that's the best. Then again, I'm not sure it would change very much. Maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. The fact of the matter is there are, the disparity between the highest population state and the lowest population state has changed dramatically since when we set up the country. And that is a definite reason as to why it was changed in the first place. But I think with, in the modern day, we could definitely look at changing it, because the only argument I could really understand was, well, the room's going to get too big. Well, I'm sure we can mitigate that. If we set the threshold higher, it would still mean that smaller states would get a better proportion of the representation, because then you have smaller states that are, being given the minimum, whether that's 1 or 2 representatives, even if they don't make the cut. So, it's like the Electoral College, where every state gets 2 or 3 electoral votes, purely based on being a state, and then the rest are awarded by size. Again, I'm going off of a lot of this from memory, from 2016, when I actually paid attention last time. Really the first time that I really paid attention to a presidential election, because younger than that I wasn't, I don't think I was old enough to vote in the previous one, and I just sort of, followed along. Yeah, I was in high school, because I remember I remember talking in American history about the election, about, Romney and, Obama's election. Oh, that's another thing, out of the race. I didn't see this coming, mostly because I wasn't paying attention to Utah, but Mitt Romney won a Senate seat in Utah. So, if you hadn't heard about him for a little while, he's still doing things in politics. He's still doing pretty sizable things in politics, because being a senator is a big deal. So, he's there. And, yeah. Good job, I guess. Good job, you won the campaign. I don't know if it was that close. I recall it being called kind of early. But then again, it is Utah. So, anyway. Yeah, that's that. Okay, let's move on from that. I've talked about the midterms for an hour, and other things, and people. I hope you guys enjoyed my take, and random chatter. It was just what was on my mind. I haven't really had anybody to chit-chat with it about, because I've been very busy, and this is my time off to come here and work on this route. So, speaking of very busy, there is the inevitable, of course, it's always going to be here, question. Zombie Slayer 234 says, what's the status on the Iron Horseman Chronicles? I missed the series. Let me tell you, you're not the only one, and I am one of those people. Now, that's a bit of a misnomer, because I still deal with the series, and in fact, we were discussing canon last night, thanks to an image that Dean posted of, I think, an eBay listing of a Alco FEF3 painted for the New York Central. Now, in the Iron Horseman universe, the New York Central did end up with some FEF3s. Why? Because the UP couldn't make up their mind as to whether they wanted them oil-fired or coal-fired. And they had them coal-fired first. They had Alco build them as coal-fired, and then decided that they didn't want to do that. And so they had Alco convert them to oil-firing. And Alco said, well, you're going to pay us for converting them. And UP said, no, not really. We'll just pretend we ordered them like that. And Alco said, no. We spent, time and effort and money on this. So you're going to pay us for converting them just like anyone would pay us for converting locomotives over. And it'll be this much per engine. And UP said, no, we'll just come by and contract our engines. We're not going to. And they said, you're not going to contract any of these engines. They are going to be given instructions to not work with you guys until we get payment from you. We can withhold these engines. We have the legal right to, because we built them. And until they're out, until they're out with a railroad, they're, under our, what's the word? Custody. They're in our custody. It's, it's like when you're a kid and your parents make all your decisions for you. When you were a locomotive and you were just built, until you get your first contract, your decisions are made for you by the locomotive works. And there is a limit on the amount of time that they can hold the engines for, and they didn't want to get anywhere close to that limit. Alco didn't want to risk coming under scrutiny, because they were in competition with other locomotive works, Baldwin, etc. Baldwin, Lima, others. They were in competition, they didn't want it to come against them, so they started advertising these brand new engines, of which they had, 10, 15 of them? Something like that? FEF3s, how many of them were made? This one I'm going to look up, because it's a foamy piece of knowledge I don't want to get wrong. Alright, let me look it up. It might be fewer than I said. I thought it was 10 at a minimum. But it might be less than, it's like 8. Oh wait, no. I'm looking at something else. Hold on, it's loading. I have Tane open, so it's not gonna work well with me. I can't wait until Trains Next comes out, and I can just get that because it runs better. Anyway. Numbers. Okay, it was 10. It was 10. So, 10 FEF3s, which were the problem ones. The ones that UP didn't convert over themselves. They had Alco do it for them in Schenectady. Before they came and contracted them. And so Alco withheld those engines for a little while. UP was then very reluctant to go up there and make a deal because they didn't want to spend extra money on these steam engines when they were already looking at converting to diesel. And they started to run into some power issues. They started looking at alternatives, and it may have hastened their dieselization a little bit more, but it may not have. The world may never know. Unless I write that into the canon somewhere. And at this point in time, buyers came forth, or well, not buyers necessarily, but contractors came forth, railroads came forth looking for engines to contract from Alco, and Alco said, here, check these Northerns out, we've just made them, they're oil-fired, and they are really nice. And they're already built. You can take one, you can contract one right now and leave with it if you're in a bind. And a couple of railroads said, okay. And one of these was the Iron Horseman Railroad, and they ended up with 844. As I'm sure you know. And the New York Central ended up with, I think, at least one, maybe two, maybe more. Haven't nailed that down yet. At least one ended up on the NDM, which is funny, with Niagaras. And others may have gone elsewhere. There's no telling. I haven't nailed that down yet. UP did end up getting some of them. Alco held on to them for long enough for UP to sort of give in and go, all right, we'll deal with this. Just give us the locomotives, we'll pay you. Their plan paid off. They got their money for the conversions and moved on, and everyone moved on with their lives except UP got half of the engines that they expected to get. So, if the UP got 5 engines, which you could assume is a decent number, then that would sort of indicate that 1 to the Iron Horseman, 2 to the New York Central, 1 to the NDM, and 1 somewhere else. Where is that somewhere else? Don't know. Haven't come up with it yet. But, if you guys want to speculate on that, feel free to say so. Where is the missing FEF? I don't know. I haven't thought about it that much. Even the confirmation of an engine going to the NDM is something that just sprung to mind. Or, well, something that I'm confirming now that I mentioned in the conversation earlier. But I didn't answer your question. Where's the Iron Horseman? The Iron Horseman is on my hard drive. It's not going anywhere. It's not going anywhere fast, either. It's not going anywhere in a good way and a bad way. I have been working, so maybe perhaps it is going somewhere. But at the same time, I've been working, so it's not going somewhere very fast. I would like to put more time and effort into it. I really wish I had the time and effort to put into it. But I've been working quite a bit. I've been doing life stuff. It catches up with you, And I wish I had more people that could do these kinds of things, but unfortunately I do not. It's just me, myself, and I, more often than not. And the difficulty is everything is stored locally for me, so even if I had people to work on it, or that were working on it, that had the capability and the time and the inclination to work on it, then it might be difficult. And, yeah. And with the script in question being To Rule the World, which is a difficult script to film and figure out, and that sort of thing, it is fairly daunting. One of the regular episodes, given all the voice lines, I could turn out an episode in a day. if I really sat down to do it. There was an episode where we went from start to finish in 24 hours flat. And I think there were later episodes where I did it even quicker than that. And these included episodes where I had to make script changes because things didn't make sense, or didn't work out, or I just couldn't film them properly. So there were times where, the Iron Horseman as a whole was made at a record-setting pace. And I owe everything really to the individuals, the rest of the Iron Horsemen, the group, my friends that came up with the Iron Horseman Chronicles. That was not my idea. I never watched the full Buccaneers, and I still haven't watched the full Buccaneers. I'm not, particularly proud of it, but it's just something unusual, that I ended up being effectively the head of this, of this series, which is, if not major, it's renowned in its own right. For being something small, it picked up quite a bit of traction. And it, and it's being written by a guy who really doesn't buy into the genre a lot. Being written by a guy who doesn't buy into the genre a lot, being filmed by a guy who really doesn't do a whole lot of filming, and being edited by a guy who does zero editing otherwise. It's a little bit odd, and it can be understandable why sometimes it's difficult for me to do work on the series, even when I do have a couple of free minutes, because it is such a doozy, especially looking at that script for To Rule the World. It's daunting. I'll admit, it is daunting. It's a lot. It's almost 100 pages. And it's 100 pages of stuff that I've read, but I don't know all of. I didn't write that script. It isn't something that I know inside and out. There are things about it that I do know, and there are things that I have to plan for and things that I can expect. But on the whole, it's in some ways a total enigma, where even as the producer, I don't know where it's going. And I do. I know where the end goal is, but it's like, this is thrown in here. These lines do this. These engines do this. These, this interaction happens, or, what have you. And it's like, interesting. Okay. Now I've got to deal with this. And, taking that and converting it into something you can see on a screen is tricky. And that's why I've been held up for so long where I am. And part of it was because, I was missing a couple of lines, but not because they were lines that were originally set out, but they were redo lines where I had looked at the script and looked at the, the sort of runtime and the effort to put in, and I looked at the clips that we had filmed for that section, and I went, I don't know, this seems like a lot of work for something that's relatively inconsequential, so I'm going to cut it back a little bit and, have it done slightly differently. And I feel like that worked out. I feel like that paid off. I don't feel like it detracts really from what was going on in the scene. So, all in all, I'm happy with the changes that I had to make, but I recognize that it would be nice to not have had made those changes and have just gone by the script, because I understand that as a writer, you don't want your work sort of perverted and changed around on you when you're not there to oversee it, when you're not there to change, what's going on. And, it's a big deal. As a writer, you tend to craft things, you tend to make things sit right and fit right and sound right and be just so. And when the producer comes in and goes, yeah, but we're going to do this, it's sort of like a what? Like, what do you mean you're going to do that? You can't do that. The change is this and that and the other thing. And they go, don't worry, it'll be fine. We'll just, we'll work around it. It'll be fine. The audience won't care. And, it'll make this flow better or make this sound better. And you go, no, it doesn't sound better. It sounds worse. What I wrote sounds good. And I can understand that squabble. That almost necessary squabble to find a balance between what is important that the writer created and what is important that the producer is creating. And, and it goes down in stages. You have the writer, you have the producer and director, you have the editors, and any of those things can change what a scene really feels like, And so, yeah, that's why it's a big deal. That's why I hesitate to make these changes, and that's why I hesitate in general. Because it's not my project. On the whole, it's not my project. Like I said, I'm really, on the whole, just a tag-along to the people that created the Iron Horseman. And I'm just a guy that's taking the vision and moving it forward. And as much as I have an impact as to what that vision is, it's based off of something that was not me. It's based off of something that was other people with ideas and stories that they wanted to tell and things that they thought were funny and sad and happy and that sort of thing. So, I want to see this through. I want to see it all the way through. We've looked forward and we've figured out a lot of stuff that could happen in the future. A lot of major things and things that won't, and things that we won't touch on, and areas and histories that we've developed for this universe that the Iron Horseman inhabits that might, or won't ever make it to the screen, and may not even make it to script. But they're things that happen, and they're things that affect other things in the universe, and so even if we're not actively going at it right now, there's a lot to be told there and a lot to be said there. And I said that if I were to ever give up the Iron Horseman, I would make every single document that we've created and every single line, every single file free for anyone to access if they wanted to continue that vision, if they wanted to see it forward. I would get permission from everyone else in the group, of course, because it's their project. But the fact of the matter is, I don't think that anyone really wants to see it die, or wants to make it die. It's just a question of how far will we go to see it completed. And that question remains up in the air. That question it's a big and important question. It is a question of perseverance versus, sort of tolerance for everything, or moving on, or livelihood, or what does it really mean? I had a lot of nights where I stayed up really late, into the wee hours of the morning. I worked my butt off. I sat in this chair for hours upon hours upon hours, putting together lines and files and video clips and songs on occasion to make the Iron Horseman what it is. And I have an attachment to it just like I have an attachment to many things, like this, where I want to see it through, where I want to see it happen, because there are stories there that we can tell. There are stories there that we would like to tell. There are stories there that, you already know the characters, you already know the settings, you already know everything that can fit into it. Now watch as it all unfolds. Watch all this beautiful interaction and this future and this, this past and these personalities and that sort of thing. Watch it unfold. Because that's what we've created, and that's what we wanted to create, and that's what we wanted to see. It wasn't just to fill a void that the Full Buccaneers left, because you can fill that with so many things. It was to create something like that was all our own, with characters that we liked and we resonated with and we associated with, and that we created. And a world that we created. And a world that is familiar, but just unfamiliar enough to be fantastical. And that's what writing and creating is about. It's about pushing that boundary and finding what, what fits and what feels good and what feels right and what makes you happy as the creator. Because as a creator, your job is twofold. It's to create something that fans really enjoy, but it's still to enjoy your job. And furthermore, the Iron Horseman is not my job. It's not my day job. I don't go to the Iron Horseman offices from 9 to 5 and put voice lines together. I don't, go over to the Roundhouse and take measurements and, spend my time looking up history on the, on the office computer with my 3 monitors. It's not something that I do because that's not part of my day job. My day job is completely separate from what the Iron Horseman is, and so it's important that the Iron Horseman be something that I enjoy doing, and not something that I force myself to do, which isn't, it isn't. It isn't something I force myself to do. It's something that, maybe I need to have some discipline about doing. Maybe I need some better motivation. But inevitably, it's something that when I get to talk about that finished product, I'm happy. I'm pleased. I'm glad that it got done. I'm glad that we could make that thing for people to enjoy. And so, on the whole, the Iron Horseman is really one of the most important productions to me. I would rather have more Iron Horsemen than more of the Building Podcast, for example. I would rather have more Iron Horsemen than more Locomotion. It's the kind of thing where it allows a kind of freedom that those things don't. And as much as I'd like an excuse to play more Minecraft, as much as I'd like an excuse to be able to, finish the campaign in Transport Fever, it's not something that I have time to do, and I have to make the decision on what I do with my time, And my days off are more precious than ever, because I don't have a lot of time free on my days on. And the time I do have free is spent catching up and being with friends and being with Madison and being with family, and, and weekends are no different. It's just weekends I have a full day, and so I can reserve that kind of thing. I don't want to be making excuses for the lack of Horseman content. But the fact of the matter is, it's a pain in the butt to find time. But I've not given up. It's not over. And it won't be, ideally, for a very long time. Things may be slow and difficult, but once the push of To Rule the World is over, things will get a little bit more manageable, a little bit more bite-size, a little bit more doable feeling. And that feeling is an important one. It's the daunting appearance of a couple of things. One being To Rule the World itself, and the other being the script that I'm on, which is the next film. So we have a whole season's worth of scripts almost. And, we're only missing a couple of episodes here and there. But the next script that is exclusively mine is the next feature film. And that, that means that I've got a huge thing to set up, and I already know, based on the lead up to it, and based on everything that the film has to be about, because we've set the stage throughout the entirety of Season 3 for a couple of very big, specific things. Cole and Katie are getting married. Just kidding. That's not what the movie's about. But it could be. Now, we've set the entirety of Season 3 up for a couple of major things, and even some things in Season 2 that led to it. And they're all about, they all come together, or they come to a head in the film. And or the feature is what it's really called in Horseman nomenclature. Yeah, and it's daunting. It's big. I know it's got to be big. I write episodes that are like 20 to 25 pages ish. And that's what you shoot for. That's what you try to do. Usually I'll write a script that's like 27 pages and then I'll cut something down, or I'll write a script that's 18 pages and add some filler. It's, you find the balancing act. You do what you need to do to make the script right, the right length, to make an episode of the right length, and to make it have enough draw, to make it interesting enough that people will watch it, and they'll watch it more than once, ideally. You don't want people to finish an episode and go, yeah, okay, and move on. You want people to go, ooh, that was good. Let's think about this, let's talk about this. Let's blog about this, and discuss this, and let's see where we can go with this. And that's really the big one. Because if you can go somewhere with the stuff you make in an episode, if you've spent your time wisely and you've created things that are now vehicles for plots moving forward, then you've done a really good job. As well as keeping the audience engaged, making a decent, arc in the episode, or with a few episodes, that sort of thing. If you've done that, you've done well. And, sometimes it's about getting that right, where you have to add a few pages or subtract a few pages. And when you're doing a script, it's that tenfold. Now, I've been working on the Housatonic a lot. That's something I can do sort of on the side. And it's something that I had inspiration for. And I haven't touched it in a little while, but when I come back to it, I'm sure I'll fill it more up. It's farther along than the next Horseman feature is, but that's because I spent a lot of time sitting down and doing research, and researching that 3-act structure, which I can apply to the film as well. It's the kind of thing where, once you figure that out, you can apply it just about everywhere, because it is the de facto movie plan, the 3-act story structure. I didn't know about it before. I mentioned this previously. Now, yeah, that, I don't want to insinuate that I have more free time than I actually do, because I don't. I can get away with working on the Housatonic without spending too much time aside. And there's a reason why I haven't touched it in a few days, or weeks, I guess. A couple of weeks. It's because I haven't had the time. Surprise, surprise. And it's the kind of thing where if I go to sit down to write the feature, there are a lot of things I'm going to need to figure out. And I'm not trying to back down from the challenge, but I want to get it right. I don't want to just throw it together and say, yeah, that's a feature, and then when I go to make the film, go, oh, why did I think this? I'm going to need to have people redo their lines. Or, why did I write this in? I'm not sure how to make this happen. Or, oh, you know what, I screwed that up. This person should be doing this thing at this time, and there's no way that this engine would be able to do this. And, that's the stuff you gotta look out for. It's the stuff that you gotta think about while you're writing. And knowing that makes me hesitate. It gives me pause. It says, well, don't rush into this. And for that reason, I said, okay, I'm gonna try to push for getting the other episodes, the ones that haven't been done in the previous season, wrapped up first. Even if they aren't my episodes, I'll assist with those scripts. I already finished one, and there's another one that I went back to, and I'm not sure I totally wrapped up, but it's due to be all set. I've got 20 minutes left, but I don't want to be starting to place trees with 20 minutes left because it crashed last time. And I still haven't figured out what I want to do with this area up here. we need to start looking at a color palette. So, S stone. Now, this is the part where I need to go in here and do my research. Do this research. So, manage content. Or do I want to do this from the start next time? You know, is this something that I want to do right now? Or is it something that I want to wait on so that I'm a little bit fresher and you guys are a little bit fresher and you can look at what I'm doing? You know, yeah, that's right. I don't want people to have to wait through an hour and 40 minutes of video to get to the bit where I'm doing something really interesting. Instead, the ideal right now is to make you wait through an hour and 40 minutes of video for me to do nothing interesting. And I think that's what I'll do. So, let's go over here. Let's go back over here. Let's spend our 20 minutes here. Now, apparently the SAP textile mill is a son of a gun. And I haven't touched it yet. So, is this it? Is this one it? Oh, whoops. I keep doing that. I want that. Is this it? Click. Click. Oh. Click. Oh my god. Ooh. Cotton bale. Cotton cloths. Cotton yarn. Cotton seed meal. This is a cotton mill. Cotton bales. General goods. Ah! Damn it! I need pictures of Spider-Man. What I need is, I need a mill that works with wool. Not thing. And I need to find a building without a smokestack. Because it does not make any sense that a smokestack, like something like this, you wouldn't really need this in a shearing facility. And that's what I'm trying to put down. I need an edge shearing facility so that we can get these sheep in here and sheared. Now this is going to be mostly scrap metalworks. So what I think I'll do is I'm going to draw out the borders of this using S stone. Let's see, let me make sure. It's built in. Okay, I can use that. So this is a steel facility. What it's going to be doing primarily is, I mean, it's a shipbreaker in part, which is coupled with the shipbreaker down in thing. But you know, the ships get broken up there, and they either get loaded on flat cars. Uh-oh. Okay, I didn't even copy paste anything, and the game crashed at a minute 40, or an hour and 40 minutes. Well, I guess we're gonna end it there. Let me just restart the game to make sure everything's okay. Let me end the recording. Yeah, I'd like to stop the recording. That's going to be a son of a gun. I really wish it would stop doing that. In fact, I should do a database repair and advanced database repair. Alright, so I'm not going to go and, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go into trains and, I'm going to make sure, but this is all going to be black screen. So, I'm glad I didn't start, well, maybe I should have started copy-pasting trees because it was going to crash anyway. But, anyway, what I'm getting at is midterms were crazy. Not really. Most of the things that were totally expected totally happened. 2, keep an eye out for Beto. 3, use changes. You guys can't see this. 4, Iron Horseman is still happening. It's still happening. And if you have any thoughts, any ideas, whatever, you can always talk to me about it. I'm more than happy to share things. I don't like to spoil things, and I definitely won't on-air spoil things. Or at least I'll try my hardest not to. But if you want to have, talk to me directly, you can always get to me on Skype at bombs321. And I will be more than happy to talk Iron Horseman with you. Again, as long as there's the agreement not to go around and spoil things to people that don't want to hear it. Because there's a lot planned for the future. There are things that I have talked about, whether or not I should have. But for the most part, I'm pretty open about it. There aren't too many huge surprises, I don't think, that are being planned. This isn't a suspense novel. This is just it's a day-to-day drama. there aren't any really big changes that are around the corner, at least. I don't think. Addition of a couple of characters. But they're already written in. So I'm gonna just see how far back we went, and then I'll cut it here. So I'm sorry we didn't get to have the full time. Train said no, and I'm gonna do an advanced database repair as well as a regular database repair, just to make sure. So let's see. Did I draw that outline? I'm not even sure if you guys got to see that because of the way that it broke. Let's see. No, it didn't save the outline. So it didn't save that. Did it save what else I was doing over here? What was the last thing that I did? Probably, was it the sand? Was it the, that wasn't showing on the map. So this sand looks done. Yeah, I definitely did that. This area looks done. Alright. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Remember to put down questions, comments, concerns in the comments below. And I will see you next week. Trainman out.